The entire banking hall fell silent the moment the paper tore. Kwaku Mensah didn't move. He just stared at the pieces of his $100 million check scattered across the marble floor, each fragment carrying the last hope of saving his dying sister. Around him, soft laughter rippled through well-dressed customers, while manager Ajoa Bediako folded her arms, certain she had just exposed a fraud. Then the glass doors opened. A powerful executive stepped inside, took one look at Kwaku, and froze. His voice when it came was low, but it shattered everything. "Why is this man standing?" A pause. Then with quiet shock, "Why is no one greeting him properly?" Because in that moment the poorest man in the room was suddenly the most important. Before we continue, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? I'd love to know. And if stories like this move you, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss what happens next. In a narrow, sun-faded corner of Accra, where rusted zinc roofs clung to the sky like tired hands refusing to let go, Kwaku Mensah woke before dawn. The air was still cool, carrying the faint scent of charcoal smoke and wet earth. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster crowed half-heartedly, as if even it had grown weary of announcing mornings that never brought much change. Kwaku lay still for a moment on the thin foam mattress, staring at the cracked ceiling above him. A small hole near the corner let in a line of pale blue light. He counted his breaths, not because he wanted to, but because it helped him delay what came next. Reality. Then he turned his head. On the other side of the room, separated only by a worn curtain, his younger sister lay curled beneath a faded cloth. Abena Mensah, 26 years old, but her body had shrunk into something fragile, something that seemed smaller every passing week. Her breathing was shallow again. Kwaku sat up immediately. "Abena," he called softly. No response. He stood, his joints stiff from years of labor, and walked across the uneven floor. Each step made a faint creaking sound. When he reached her, he knelt and gently touched her shoulder. Her skin was warm. Too warm. "Kai," he muttered under his breath. Abena's eyes fluttered open slowly. They were still beautiful, deep soft, filled with a quiet kindness, but there was a tiredness in them that no sleep could fix. "Kwaku," she whispered, her voice barely more than air. "You're awake already." "I've been awake," he said, forcing a small smile. "You're the one trying to sleep your life away." She gave a weak laugh, then coughed. The sound cut through him like a blade. "I dreamed," she said after a moment, her gaze drifting somewhere beyond the room. "I was walking, properly. No pain. Just walking." Kwaku swallowed. "That means it's coming," he said. "Better days." Abena didn't answer. She only looked at him, and in that look there was something deeper than doubt. There was acceptance, and that terrified him. He stood and moved toward the small plastic basin in the corner. The water inside was already warm from the heat trapped in the room. He dipped a cloth into it, wrung it carefully, then returned to her side. "Let me clean your face," he said. "You do too much," she murmured. "I don't do enough," he replied quietly. He wiped her forehead, her cheeks, her neck, slow, careful movements as if she might break if he rushed. For years, Kwaku had been many things: mechanic, porter, welder, cleaner. But most of all, he had been Abena's shield. After their parents died within 2 years of each other, there had been no one else. No extended family willing to take responsibility, no safety net. Just the two of them, standing in the wreckage of what used to be a home. Kwaku had been 24 then. Abena was just a teenager. He had promised her something that night, a promise he had repeated so many times it had become part of his bones. "I will not let anything happen to you." But life had a way of testing promises, until they cracked. Her illness came quietly at first. Fatigue, headaches, then pain that refused to leave. By the time they understood it was serious, It had already grown into something far more dangerous than they could afford to fight. Hospitals had become places of polite rejection. Doctors had learned to soften their voices when speaking to people like Kwaku. We can try basic treatment. There are advanced options, but the cost is always the same ending: money. Kwaku stood and moved toward the small wooden table that served as both kitchen and storage. On it lay a few coins, a torn notebook, and a folded hospital paper. He had read so many times the ink was beginning to fade. He didn't need to open it again. He knew the number by heart, an amount so large it didn't feel real. He picked up the coins and counted them slowly. Not even enough for a proper consultation. Behind him, Abena shifted. "Kwaku," she called softly. He turned immediately. Don't go to the workshop today." He frowned. "Why?" She hesitated. "I don't like the way you looked yesterday," she said. "You came home quiet." He forced a chuckle. "Since when did you become my supervisor? I'm serious." He walked back and sat beside her. "I'm fine," he said. "Just tired." But Abena studied him. She had always been able to see through him. "You're carrying something," she said gently. "And you think I don't notice?" Kwaku looked away. Outside, the street was beginning to wake. Voices, footsteps, the distant rumble of a passing trotro. Life was moving forward as it always did, indifferent to the struggles hidden inside small rooms like theirs. He began, then stopped. He didn't want to say it, didn't want to give shape to the fear that had been growing inside him for months. "I just need a breakthrough," he said finally. Abena smiled faintly. "You've been saying that for years." "I know," he admitted. "But you haven't given up." He shook his head. "I don't know how to." She reached for his hand. Her fingers were light, almost weightless, but the gesture grounded him. "Then don't start now," she said. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Silence settled between them. Not heavy, not empty, but full of things they didn't need to say out loud. Then Abena squeezed his hand slightly. "If it gets too hard," she began. Kwaku stiffened. "No," he said immediately. She looked at him, calm but firm. "You have to listen to me." I said no. "If it gets too hard," she repeated softly. "You have to let go." Kwaku pulled his hand away and stood up abruptly. "I won't bury you," he said, his voice low but shaking. "Not while I'm still breathing." Abena watched him, her expression gentle, almost sad. "You're not God, Kwaku." "No," he said, "but I'm your brother." And in his mind that meant something. It had to mean something. Because if it didn't, if love, sacrifice, and stubborn hope were not enough, then what was left? He grabbed his worn shirt from the back of a chair and slipped it on. "I'm going to the workshop," he said, avoiding her eyes. Abena didn't argue. She just lay back slowly, her gaze following him as he moved toward the door. "Kwaku," she called one last time. He paused. Come back early today." He nodded. "I will." But as he stepped outside into the growing heat of Accra, something inside him felt heavier than usual. Like time was running out, and somewhere deep beneath the noise of the waking city, there was a quiet, almost invisible shift in the direction of his life. Something he couldn't see yet. Something already moving toward him. The envelope arrived just after midday when the sun hung high and merciless over the dusty streets of Accra. Kwaku was bent over the hood of a broken-down taxi, his hands blackened with grease, his shirt clinging to his back with sweat. The small roadside workshop buzzed with the familiar rhythm of metal tools and tired men trying to hold machines and their lives together. Kwaku, one of the younger boys, shouted from the roadside. He didn't look up immediately. "If it's another customer asking for a miracle with no money, tell them I'm busy performing one already." The boy laughed nervously. "No, it's not that. Someone is asking for you." That made Kwaku pause. He wiped his hands on a rag and stepped out from under the hood. Standing near the edge of the road was a man dressed too neatly for that part of town. Dark trousers, crisp shirt, polished shoes that had never known dust like this. And in his hand, an envelope. "Are you Kwaku Mensah?" the man asked. Kwaku nodded slowly. "Yes." The man stepped forward and extended the envelope. "This was delivered to our office with your name and instructions to ensure it reaches you. Directly," he said. "Signature required." Kwaku frowned. "Office courier service," the man replied simply. Kwaku hesitated for a second before taking the envelope. It felt heavier than it should have, thick official. "Who sent it?" he asked. The man shook his head. "I'm not authorized to disclose that. Just sign here." He handed over a small clipboard. Kwaku signed his handwriting, rough but steady. When he looked up again, the man was already stepping back. "Have a good day," the courier said, then turned and walked away, without another word. The workshop fell quiet for a moment. All eyes were on Kwaku. "What is it?" one of the mechanics asked. Kwaku stared at the envelope. "I don't know." "Open it," another said eagerly. He didn't move. Something about it made his chest tighten. Not fear exactly, but something close. As if whatever was inside would change something, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for that. Kwaku, the boy, urged again. "Open it." Finally, he exhaled and slid a finger under the seal. The paper tore softly. Inside there were two items. A folded letter, and beneath it, a check. Kwaku didn't even register the letter at first. His eyes locked onto the numbers printed across the check. He blinked, then blinked again. His mind refused to process it. What one of the men asked. "What does it say?" Kwaku swallowed. "It must be wrong," he murmured. "Let me see, no." He snapped instinctively, pulling it back, but it was too late. The closest mechanic had already leaned in. And then, silence. "What is that number?" the man whispered. Kwaku forced himself to read it again. $100 million. $100 million. The world around him seemed to tilt. "That's not real," someone said immediately. "That has to be fake." "It's a joke," another added. "Who would send you that kind of money?" Kwaku didn't answer. His hands were trembling slightly now. He picked up the letter. It was printed on thick official paper. He unfolded it slowly and began to read. "Dear Mr. Kwaku Mensah, if you are reading this, it means that a promise long delayed is finally being honored. Several years ago, you encountered a man on the brink of death after a roadside accident. That man carried documents, bearer instruments, and financial assets that could have easily changed your life overnight. Instead, you chose honesty. You protected what was not yours. You returned everything without hesitation. That man was Mr. Daniel K. Owusu, a senior partner in one of the largest financial holdings connected to our institution. Before his passing, Mr. Owusu gave explicit instructions that you were to be located and compensated, not as charity, but as recognition of integrity in its rarest form. Due to internal failures and interference, this instruction was delayed. That delay is our failure. The enclosed check represents the fulfillment of Mr. Owusu's directive. You are requested to present yourself at our main branch in Accra for formal verification and processing. We deeply regret the years it has taken to reach you. Integrity like yours is not forgotten. Sincerely, Office of the Executive Board. By the time Kwaku finished reading, his vision had blurred. He lowered the paper slowly. The workshop was silent. "Is it real?" someone finally asked. Kwaku didn't know what to say. The memory came back all at once. The accident. The man lying on the roadside, bleeding, barely conscious. The briefcase. The documents. The moment he had opened it and realized what it contained. Shares, certificates, cash instruments. Enough to disappear from poverty forever. He had closed it, without taking a single thing. At the time, it hadn't felt like a decision. It had felt like the only thing he could live with. "I remember," he whispered. "You remember what the young boy asked?" Kwaku looked at the check again. "I remember him." The mechanics exchanged glances. "So it's real?" one asked cautiously. Kwaku shook his head slightly. "I don't know." But something deep inside him, something quiet and stubborn, was beginning to believe. His thoughts raced. Abena, hospital, treatment, hope. It all came crashing into him at once so fast it almost made him dizzy. "What are you going to do?" someone asked. Kwaku folded the letter carefully and held the check like it might disappear if he loosened his grip. "I have to go to the bank," he said, when he didn't hesitate. "Today," just like that one of the men said. "You think they'll just hand over that kind of money?" Kwaku met his eyes. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I don't have a choice. Because for the first time in years, there was a door, a real one, not hope built on empty promises or delayed prayers. Something tangible, something that could save her." He grabbed his worn bag from the corner and slipped the envelope inside, holding it close. "Kwaku," one of the older mechanics said, quietly. "Be careful." He nodded. "I will." But as he stepped away from the workshop and into the heat of the afternoon, his heart was beating faster than it had in years. Not from fear, not from exhaustion, but from something he had almost forgotten. How to feel. Possibility. And yet, somewhere in the back of his mind, there was a small, quiet warning. Because not every door that opens leads to relief. Some led to something far more difficult, something that tests not just hope but dignity. By the time Kwaku left the workshop, the sun had already begun its slow descent, casting long shadows across the streets of Accra. He walked quickly at first, then slowed down, then stopped. The envelope was still pressed tightly under his arm, as if letting go even slightly might cause everything inside it to vanish. He stepped into the shade of a small kiosk and leaned against the wooden wall, breathing hard. This was real. Or at least, it felt real, but something inside him refused to fully trust it yet. He pulled the envelope out again, opened it and stared at the check. $100 million. The number still didn't belong to his world. It didn't match the life of a man who counted coins before buying bread. A man who knew exactly how long 5 cities could stretch. A man who had spent years hearing "we're sorry" from doctors who couldn't help him. Kwaku. He turned. It was Kojo, one of the older mechanics from the workshop who had followed him quietly. "You just left like that," Kojo said. "I thought maybe you needed someone to walk with you." Kwaku managed a small smile. "You think I'll get lost?" Kojo shook his head. "No. I think you might wake up." That hit deeper than Kwaku expected. "I've been awake my whole life," he said. Kojo stepped closer and looked at the check. "You believe this?" Kwaku hesitated. "I want to," he admitted. Kojo nodded slowly. "That's the dangerous part." They stood in silence for a moment, watching people pass by, women balancing goods on their heads, children weaving through traffic, drivers shouting for passengers. Life continued, unaffected. "If it's real," Kojo said finally, "your life changes today." Kwaku didn't respond. "And if it's not," Kojo added. Kwaku finished the sentence quietly. "Then nothing changes." Kojo placed a hand on his shoulder. "Either way," he said, "don't let them make you feel small." Kwaku looked at him. "What do you mean?" Kojo gave a short, knowing laugh. "You're going to one of those big banks," he said. "You think they don't look at people like us and decide our value before we speak?" Kwaku said nothing, because he knew. He had seen it too many times, in banks, in offices, in hospitals, in the way eyes shifted, in the way voices changed, in the way dignity was quietly stripped from you piece by piece until you were nothing more than a problem to be managed. Kojo squeezed his shoulder, once then stepped back. Just remember who you are, he said. Kwaku nodded. I will. But as Kojo walked away, Kwaku felt something tighten in his chest again. Because remembering who you are is easy, until someone powerful decides you are something else. Across the city in the polished glass building of the bank's main branch, Adjoa Bediako adjusted her reflection in the mirrored wall behind her desk. Everything had to be perfect. Her suit was tailored precisely. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor. Her posture was straight, controlled, commanding. This was her domain, and she intended to keep it that way. Madam, one of the junior staff approached nervously. The regional office confirmed the visit tomorrow. They may come earlier than expected. Adjoa frowned slightly. They said tomorrow, she said. Yes, but they mentioned a possible adjustment. She exhaled slowly. Then we prepare as if they are coming today, she said. I don't want any surprises. Yes, madam. The staff member hurried away. Adjoa turned back to her desk, tapping her fingers lightly against the surface. Inspections. She hated them. Not because she had anything to hide, but because they reminded her that no matter how high she climbed, there was always someone above her. Watching, judging, waiting for a mistake. She had not come this far to fall, not after everything. Years ago, she had been just another girl from a crowded neighborhood, fighting for space, for recognition, for a chance to be seen as more than where she came from. She had worked harder than everyone, sacrificed more, endured humiliation, rejection, and the quiet cruelty of being underestimated. And now, she was in control. She decided who was taken seriously, who was dismissed, who belonged, and who didn't. Madam, another staff member called from across the hall. There's a customer asking for assistance. He doesn't have an appointment. Adjoa didn't look up. Direct him to the standard desk. They already tried. He insists. Then he can insist. Somewhere else, she said. Coldly. We don't disrupt operations for unverified walk-ins. The staff member hesitated. He says it's urgent. Adjoa finally looked up. Everything is urgent to people who don't understand process, she replied. That doesn't make it important. The staff member nodded quickly and stepped back. Adjoa leaned into her chair, her expression calm but firm. This was how order was maintained. Rules, structure, control. Without it, everything collapsed into chaos, and she refused to let chaos enter her branch. Back on the street, Kwaku had finally reached the main road. The bank building stood ahead of him, rising above everything else like a statement. Glass, steel, power. He slowed as he approached it. People moved in and out of the entrance, well-dressed men and women, confident, purposeful belonging. Kwaku looked down at himself. His shirt was clean but worn. His trousers were faded. His shoes had been repaired more times than he could count. He suddenly became aware of every detail. Every imperfection, every sign that he did not belong. For a moment he considered turning back, just walking away, returning to the workshop, to the familiar, to the predictable struggle he understood. But then Abena, her face, her voice, her fragile breathing, he tightened his grip on the envelope. No, he whispered to himself. He took a step forward, then another, each step heavier than the last. As he reached the glass doors, a security guard glanced at him briefly. The look was quick, but it said enough. Kwaku had seen that look before. It measured, categorized, dismissed. Can I help you? The guard asked, his tone polite but distant. Kwaku swallowed. I need to speak to someone, he said. What is your business? Kwaku hesitated for a second. Then he lifted the envelope slightly. I have something to process. The guard's eyes flicked to the envelope, then back to Kwaku's face. There was doubt there. Clear, unhidden. But after a moment, he stepped aside. Go inside. Reception desk. Kwaku nodded. Thank you. He stepped through the doors. The air inside was cooler, quieter, controlled. Everything felt different. The floor shone, the walls reflected light, voices were softer, measured, refined. Kwaku stood still for a second, taking it in. This world, this space, so far removed from his own. Then he walked forward, each step echoing slightly, each gaze he passed lingering just a second too long. He reached the reception desk. The woman behind it looked up, her expression neutral. "Good afternoon," she said. "How may I assist you?" Kwaku placed the envelope gently on the counter. "I need to speak to someone about this," he said. She glanced at it, then at him, and in that brief moment, something shifted. A small pause, a subtle change. Not yet hostility, not yet rejection, but something close, something familiar, and Kwaku felt it immediately. The beginning of a test he did not ask for but would soon be forced to endure. The receptionist's fingers hovered over the envelope for a second longer than necessary, not touching it. Not yet. Her eyes moved from the plain brown paper to Kwaku's face, then down to his worn shirt, his hands still faintly stained with grease, the tired lines etched into his skin by years of labor. A silent calculation, the kind that didn't need words. "What exactly is this regarding?" she asked, her tone still polite, but thinner now. Kwaku kept his voice steady. "It's a financial matter. That much is obvious," she replied lightly, though there was no warmth in it. "Do you have an appointment?" "No. Then you'll need to. It's urgent," he said gently but firmly. She paused. Everyone around them seemed to continue as normal paper being signed, quiet conversations between suited clients, the distant clicking of keyboards, but Kwaku felt as if a spotlight had quietly formed around him. "Sir," the receptionist said, lowering her voice slightly. "We handle many urgent matters here. That's why we have a process." Kwaku nodded slowly. "I understand," he said. "But I was asked to come here. Specifically." Something in the way he said it. Not loud, not aggressive, just certain made her hesitate again. "Who asked you?" she said. Kwaku slid the envelope forward. "It's inside." She finally picked it up. Her fingers moved carefully, almost cautiously, as if expecting something strange. She opened it, pulled out the letter first, and began to read. At first, her expression remained unchanged, professional, neutral. Then gradually, a flicker. Her eyes slowed. She read a line again, then another. And just for a moment, something broke through the mask. Confusion, then disbelief. She lowered the letter slightly and glanced at the check beneath it. Her fingers froze. "What is it?" a voice from the side asked casually. Another staff member had noticed the shift. "Nothing," she said quickly, straightening. "Just a document, but it wasn't nothing, not even close." She looked back at Kwaku. For a split second she didn't know what to do, because the man standing in front of her did not match what she was holding, at all. "Please wait here," she said finally. Then she stood up, gathering the papers quickly. "I need to show this to the branch manager." Kwaku nodded. "Thank you." As she walked away, her steps were faster than before. Not running, but close. Kwaku stood alone at the counter. The seconds stretched. People nearby began to notice. Not directly, but in the way humans always do when something feels slightly out of place. A glance here, a whisper there, a shift in attention. He could feel it. The weight of being observed, judged, measured without being understood. A man in an expensive suit, standing a few feet away, leaned slightly toward another and murmured something. They both looked at Kwaku briefly, then smiled, not kindly. Kwaku looked away. He focused on the polished floor beneath his feet, on the steady rhythm of his own breathing, on Abena, always Abena. Inside her glass-walled office, Ajo Abediako didn't look up immediately when the receptionist entered. "I said no interruptions unless it's critical," she said, still reviewing a document. I believe this is the receptionist replied carefully. That made Adjoa pause. She set the paper down and lifted her gaze. What is it? The receptionist stepped forward and handed over the envelope. This was brought in by a walk-in customer, she said. No appointment, but I think you should see it. Adjoa frowned slightly. A walk-in. She opened the envelope, pulled out the letter, read. Her expression didn't change. Not at first. She had trained herself well. Years of discipline had built a face that revealed nothing unless she chose to. But internally she was already rejecting it. By the time she reached the second paragraph, she had already made a decision. Impossible. By the time she saw the check, her lips pressed together. Not surprise, not shock, dismissal. This is fake, she said calmly. The receptionist hesitated. Madam, the letter can be printed by anyone with access to decent equipment. Adjoa interrupted. She held up the check between two fingers as if it were something slightly offensive. $100 million, she said, and delivered to... Who exactly? Kwaku Mensah, the receptionist, answered. Adjoa let out a short, humorless breath. Of course, she stood. Where is he? At the front desk. Adjoa nodded once. Good. Let's not waste time. When Adjoa stepped out into the main hall, the subtle tension shifted immediately. Staff straightened. Voices softened further. Even the air seemed to align itself with her presence. She walked with measured confidence, her heels striking the marble floor in precise rhythm. Her eyes scanned the area once and landed on him. Kwaku, standing exactly where the receptionist had left him, still, quiet, holding nothing now, just waiting. For a brief second, Adjoa studied him, and in that moment, she saw everything she believed she needed to see. A man out of place, a man with nothing, a man who did not belong in a conversation about millions. Her conclusion was instant. She approached. Kwaku Mensah, she said. Kwaku looked up. Yes, I'm Adjoa Bediako branch manager, she said. Kwaku nodded respectfully. Good afternoon. She didn't return the greeting. Instead, she held up the letter and check. You brought this, she asked. Yes. And you expect us to process it? She continued. Yes, he said again, his voice steady. A small smile touched her lips. Not kind, not amused, something sharper. You understand what this is? She asked, raising the check slightly. Kwaku met her eyes. I believe I do. Do you? She said softly. There was a shift in her tone now, subtle, but dangerous. Because from where I'm standing, she continued. This looks like a very poor attempt at fraud. A ripple moved through the nearby space. People were listening now, not openly, but enough. Kwaku felt it. Still, he didn't raise his voice. It's not fraud, he said. Adjoa tilted her head slightly. No, no. She stepped closer. Then explain to me, she said, how a man who walks in here dressed like that, her eyes flicked briefly over him, is in possession of a check worth $100 million. Kwaku's jaw tightened slightly, but he answered. It was given to me. By whom? The information is in the letter. She let out a soft laugh. I read the letter. Then you know. What I know, she said, her voice sharpening, is that people come into institutions like this every day with stories. Kwaku didn't respond. And those stories, she continued, are usually designed to test how much we're willing to overlook. I'm not asking you to overlook anything, Kwaku said quietly. Just verify it. That word, verify. It lingered. Adjoa's smile disappeared. Because verification meant process. And process meant time. And time right now meant risk. Because something about this situation annoyed her. You think this is how it works, she said. You walk in without an appointment, hand over a suspicious document, and demand immediate attention. I didn't demand, Kwaku said. You implied urgency. It is urgent. For you, she replied. Kwaku took a slow breath. My sister is sick, he said. I was asked to come here. That's all I'm doing. For a fraction of a second, something flickered. Not empathy, but recognition, of desperation, and Adjoa hated desperation, because it reminded her of a version of herself she had buried. "Deep. You people always have a story," she said flatly. The words landed harder than anything before. Kwaku didn't speak, because there was nothing he could say that would make her see him differently, and she had already decided not to try. She looked at the check again, then at him. Then she made a decision. A dangerous one, a final one, and the room, though quiet, felt like it was leaning forward, waiting for what she would do next. The decision formed in Adjoa's mind with cold clarity. Not caution, not doubt, certainty. She had seen too many stories, too many desperate men trying to bend systems that were never designed for them. And every time she allowed even a fraction of hesitation, it cost her time, authority, control. She would not hesitate now, not in front of her staff, not in front of clients, not today. She lifted the check slightly higher, letting the light catch its surface. $100 million, she said, her voice carrying just enough to draw attention without appearing loud. That is what you expect this institution to process for you. A few heads turned. More eyes followed. Kwaku felt the room closing in, not physically, but in that invisible way. Spaces shrink when judgment fills them. "I am asking you to verify it," he said quietly. Adjoa shook her head once. "No," she replied. "You are asking me to take you seriously." Kwaku didn't answer, because he knew she was right. That was exactly what he was asking, and she had already decided he didn't deserve it. She turned slightly, addressing the nearby staff now. "Do you see this?" she said, holding up the check. "This is what happens when people think institutions like ours are places to test fantasies." A soft murmur rippled. No one spoke directly, but the atmosphere shifted, leaning toward her authority. Kwaku's hands tightened at his sides. Still he stood. Still, he didn't raise his voice, because somewhere inside him, there was still a belief, fragile but stubborn, that truth did not need to shout. Adjoa looked back at him. "Let me make this simple for you," she said. "This document is not legitimate. You haven't verified it," Kwaku replied. "I don't need to." There it was. The final wall. Kwaku swallowed. "Please," he said, and the word came out softer than he intended. "Just check it properly." Something in that word, "please," shifted the energy again. Not toward empathy, but toward discomfort. Because now it was no longer just a dispute. It was a man asking to be seen, and that made some people uneasy. Adjoa's expression hardened. She stepped closer. "You're creating a disturbance," she said. "And I'm asking you to stop." "I'm not creating anything," Kwaku said. "I'm just standing here." "And holding up operations," she replied sharply. The irony passed unnoticed by everyone except Kwaku. He nodded slowly. "Then let me leave it with you," he said. "Verify it later. I'll come back." For a brief moment that might have been enough. A way out. A softer ending. But Adjoa was no longer interested in soft endings, because something about this situation had already crossed a line inside her. Not a professional line, a personal one. She saw not just a man, but a challenge. And she had built her entire identity on never being challenged by people she considered beneath her authority. "No," she said firmly. Kwaku looked at her. "No," he repeated. "No," she said again, "because that would imply this is worth our time." The words landed like stones. Heavy. Final. Kwaku felt something shift inside his chest. Not anger exactly, but something close. A quiet breaking. Still he didn't move, didn't argue, didn't shout. He just stood there. And somehow that made it worse, because silence can feel like resistance when someone expects you to shrink. Adjoa exhaled slowly. Then, without warning, she tore the check. The sound was sharp, louder than it should have been. Paper splitting under deliberate force. For a split second, no one reacted. Then another tear, and another. Kwaku's breath caught. Not because of the money, but because of what it meant. Abena, her face, her voice, her fragile body lying in that small room. Gone, in pieces, on a polished floor. Adjoa let the torn fragments fall from her hand. They drifted down slowly, scattering across the marble like something weightless. Something meaningless. There, she said calmly. That's the end of that. A few people laughed. Not loudly, but enough. Enough for Kwaku to hear. Enough for it to stay with him. Forever. He didn't bend down immediately. He just stood there, looking at the pieces, as if trying to understand how something so important could be reduced to something so small. You should leave now, Adjoa said, her voice, returning to its professional calm. Before security has to assist you. Kwaku didn't respond. He slowly lowered himself to his knees, not in submission, not in defeat, but because something inside him refused to let those pieces remain on the floor. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for them, each fragment, carefully, as if they still mattered, as if they still held something. Around him the room had shifted again. The laughter faded, not out of sympathy, but out of uncertainty, because there was something uncomfortable about watching a man pick up what had just been taken from him, piece by piece. No one helped, no one stopped him. Adjoa watched for a moment, then turned away. Get someone to escort him out, she said quietly to a guard. She didn't look back, because as far as she was concerned, it was over. Kwaku gathered the last piece. His fingers closed around it, and for the first time since entering the bank, he felt empty. Not angry, not broken, just empty. He stood slowly. The room blurred slightly around him. Not from tears, but from the weight of something he didn't yet have the strength to name. He placed the torn pieces back into the envelope, folded it carefully, held it close, then turned toward the door. No one stopped him. No one spoke. The same people who had watched now looked away, because it was easier that way. Easier than acknowledging what had just happened. Easier than asking whether it was right. Kwaku reached the glass doors. His hand touched the handle. For a moment he paused. Not because he expected anything to change, but because some part of him, small, stubborn human, still hoped, still believed, still waited. But nothing came. No voice, no interruption, no reversal, so he pushed the door open and stepped outside, into the heat, into the noise, into the same world he had walked in from, except now something had been taken, something he didn't know how to replace, and behind him, inside that polished building, no one yet realized that the moment they had just dismissed was about to destroy everything they thought they controlled. The glass doors had barely settled behind Kwaku when another car pulled up to the front of the bank. It was not loud, not flashy, but it carried a quiet authority that made even the security guards straighten instinctively. A black sedan, clean, controlled, important. The driver stepped out first, scanning the entrance briefly before opening the rear door. Then he stepped aside. Mr. Kwame Ofori emerged slowly. He was a man in his late 50s, tall, composed, with the kind of presence that did not need to announce itself. His suit was simple but precise, his posture effortless, his expression unreadable. He paused at the entrance, not because he needed to, but because he always did. He believed in observing before acting, and today, something caught his attention immediately. A man, standing just outside the doors, holding an envelope. Still, too still, Kwaku. For a brief second, Kwame's gaze lingered. Something about the man's posture, the quiet heaviness, the way he held the envelope close to his chest felt familiar, not visually, but instinctively. Kwame stepped forward. As he approached, Kwaku turned slightly as if sensing the presence behind him. Their eyes met, and in that instant, time slowed. Kwame's expression changed. Not dramatically, not visibly to anyone else. But inside, recognition hit him like a sudden silent force. The face was older, more worn, but the memory was unmistakable. A roadside, blood, a dying man, a stranger who had refused to take what wasn't his. Kwaku. Kwame stopped, completely. The driver behind him hesitated. "Sir," he asked softly. But Kwame didn't respond. He was staring. Not at a poor man, not at a stranger, but at someone whose name had once been spoken with respect in a room full of powerful men. A name tied to a story that should never have been forgotten. And yet, it had been buried, delayed, ignored until now. Kwaku shifted slightly under the weight of the gaze. For a moment, he thought the man might be another official about to question him, dismiss him or send him away, so he lowered his eyes slightly, prepared, used to it. But then Kwame spoke. "Why are you outside?" The question was simple, but the tone, it was not suspicious, not dismissive, it was something else entirely. Kwaku looked up again. "I was just leaving," he said quietly. Kwame's eyes moved to the envelope in his hands. "Torn," he said. Not a question, a statement. Kwaku hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." Kwame's jaw tightened slightly. He turned his head toward the bank doors. "Who handled your case?" he asked. Kwaku didn't answer immediately, because something about the question felt different, not accusatory, not indifferent. It felt like it mattered. Inside, Kwaku said finally. Kwame nodded once. Then, without another word, he turned and walked into the bank. Fast, not hurried, but purposeful, and for the first time since the tearing of the check. Something shifted. Not in the room, not yet, but in the direction of everything that was about to happen. Inside, the atmosphere remained controlled, polished, calm, as if nothing had happened. Adjoa had already returned to her office. Staff had resumed their tasks. The fragments of the incident had been quietly erased, not physically, but socially. Ignored, forgotten, dismissed, until the doors opened again. Kwame Ofori stepped in, and everything changed. The reaction was immediate. Staff straightened, voices lowered, eyes shifted, because this was not just any executive. This was a man whose presence meant decisions, consequences, power. Sir, one of the senior staff members hurried forward. "We weren't informed you would be arriving today." Kwame didn't slow down. Clearly, he said. His voice was calm, but there was something beneath it, something sharp. "Where is your branch manager?" he asked. "In her office, sir." The staff member replied quickly. Kwame nodded. "Good." He continued walking. The staff member hesitated for half a second, then followed, because something in the air felt wrong. Adjoa looked up as her office door opened. Her expression shifted instantly, from irritation to composed professionalism. "Mr. Ofori," she said, standing. "We weren't expecting," Sid Kwame said. She froze, just for a second, then sat, slowly. Kwame closed the door behind him. The room felt smaller immediately, more contained, more intense. He didn't sit. Instead, he stood across from her desk, looking at her, not speaking, letting the silence stretch. Adjoa held her posture, calm, controlled, but inside, something was beginning to move. Because this was not how inspections usually began. "Did a man come in here today?" Kwame asked finally. Adjoa didn't hesitate. "Yes." "Describe him." "A walk-in," she said. "Unverified. Presented fraudulent documentation." Kwame's eyes didn't move. "What documentation?" "A check," she replied, claiming to be worth $100 million. "And what did you do?" Adjoa straightened slightly. "I followed protocol," she said. "Assessed the document, identified inconsistencies, and you verified it." Kwame interrupted. A pause. "No," she said. "Why not?" "Because it was clearly not legitimate." Kwame's gaze hardened. Clearly, he repeated. Yes. Silence again. Then what did you do with the check? Ajoa held his gaze. I disposed of it. Kwame didn't blink. How? Another pause. Then I tore it. The words landed. Heavy, irreversible. And, for the first time since entering the building, Kwame's expression changed fully. Not anger, not yet, but something deeper. Disappointment. The kind that carried weight, history, meaning. He took a slow breath, then spoke. Bring him back. Ajoa frowned slightly. Sir, the man Kwame said. Bring him back. He has already left, she replied. And given the situation, I don't believe. Bring him back, Kwame repeated. This time there was no room for interpretation. No softness, no discussion. Just command. Ajoa felt it. The shift, the loss of control. But, sir, she said carefully with respect, if we begin entertaining, Kwame stepped forward. Not aggressively, but enough. Enough to close the distance. Enough to make the power dynamic unmistakable. Do you know who that man is? He asked. Ajoa met his eyes. No. Kwame held her gaze. For a long moment. Then his voice dropped. Lower. Sharper. He is the reason. He said slowly that some of us are still sitting in these offices today. Ajoa's expression flickered. Just slightly. Not understanding. Not yet. Kwame straightened. And you, he continued, just tore up the one thing that proves it. The room went still. Completely still. Because in that moment, everything Ajoa thought she understood began to unravel. And somewhere outside, Kwaku was still walking away, believing it was over. Not knowing that behind him, the truth had just entered the room, and nothing would remain the same. The words hung in the air long after Kwame finished speaking. For a moment, Ajoa said nothing, because for the first time since she had taken this position, she didn't have control of the narrative. What do you mean? He is the reason, she asked carefully. Kwame didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the side of the office. His hands clasped loosely behind his back. His eyes moved briefly across the glass wall where the banking hall stretched out below in quiet order, as if nothing had happened, as if nothing had been broken. Years ago, Kwame began, his voice calm, but waited. There was an incident that almost destroyed everything we had built. Ajoa listened, not interrupting now, not dismissing, because something in his tone told her this was no longer about a customer. This was about something much bigger. A senior partner, Kwame continued, Daniel K. Owusu, was involved in a serious road accident outside the city. The name meant nothing to her, but she didn't say that. He was carrying sensitive financial instruments, Kwame said. Bearer documents, ownership stakes, transitional control assets. Things that in the wrong hands could have shifted millions, no hundreds of millions overnight. Ajoa felt her chest tighten slightly, because she understood what that meant. Not just money, power, control. And he survived, she asked quietly. Barely, Kwame replied. When he was found, he was unconscious, bleeding heavily, vulnerable. He paused, then turned back to her. And he was not alone. Ajoa's breath slowed. There was someone else there, she asked. Kwame nodded. A man who had every opportunity to take everything he said. A man who opened that briefcase, saw exactly what was inside. Ajoa's eyes flickered, and for the first time, a small crack appeared in her certainty. And he didn't take it. She asked. No. Kwame's answer was immediate, firm, certain. He didn't take a single thing he said. Not a document, not a note, not a signature that could have changed his life forever. Silence settled between them. Ajoa swallowed. Why, she asked. Kwame looked at her. Not judging, not accusing, just asking her to think. Because some people, he said quietly, still believe that what belongs to others should remain untouched even when no one is watching. The words landed differently this time. Not like a lecture, like a mirror. Ajoa looked away, briefly. Her fingers tightened slightly on the edge of her desk. And that man, she began, slowly was him. Kwame nodded. Kwaku Mensah. The name felt heavier now, different. No longer just a name attached to a situation, but to a story, a choice, a moment. And Daniel Owusu remembered him, she asked. Kwame's expression softened slightly. Not immediately, he admitted. He was unconscious for days, but when he recovered, he asked one question. Ajoa didn't speak. He asked who returned the case, Kwame said. Because he knew if it had been anyone else. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Ajoa understood, and when he found out she asked, Kwame exhaled slowly. He gave instructions, he said. Clear, direct. He wanted that man found, recognized, rewarded not as charity but as acknowledgement of something rare. Ajoa's throat tightened. And that never happened, she asked. Kwame's jaw hardened. It was delayed, he said. The word was too soft for what he meant. Ajoa could hear it. Delayed, how she pressed. Kwame looked at her directly now. Through negligence, he said. Through internal interference. Through people who decided other priorities mattered more. Ajoa felt something shift in her stomach. Because she knew that system. She operated inside it. Sometimes she benefited from it. And now she asked quietly. Now Kwame said we are cleaning what should have been resolved years ago. The room fell silent again. But this time the silence was not empty. It was heavy with understanding. And consequences. Ajoa's mind raced. The check, the letter, the man, the way he stood, the way he spoke, the way he didn't fight, didn't shout, didn't beg beyond a single word. Please. Her chest tightened. I didn't know, she said. It came out softer than she expected. Not defensive, not strong. Just true. Kwame nodded slowly. I believe you, he said. But there was no comfort in that. Because ignorance did not undo action, and yet he continued. You made a decision. Ajoa closed her eyes briefly. Just for a second. Because she knew what was coming. You chose not to verify, Kwame said. Yes, she admitted. You chose to judge based on appearance. She didn't answer, because there was no point denying it. And you chose. He said, his voice, lowering slightly, to destroy the one document that connects that man to a promise made in good faith. Ajoa's hands tightened. I thought it was fake, she said. Kwame stepped closer again. Not aggressively, but deliberately. Did you think, he asked quietly, or did you decide? The question hit harder than anything else, because it forced her to confront something she had avoided for years. The difference between assumption and truth. Ajoa didn't respond. She couldn't. Because for the first time, she saw it clearly. She hadn't verified. She hadn't questioned deeply. She hadn't allowed uncertainty. She had decided, and then acted. Kwame straightened. The man you dismissed, he said, walked into this building carrying more integrity than most of us will ever be tested with. Ajoa's chest tightened again, and he walked out. Kwame continued with nothing. The weight of those words settled fully now, not just on the situation, but on her, her choices, her actions, her identity. For years she had believed she was protecting order, maintaining standards, filtering out chaos. But now she saw something else. A pattern, a blind spot, a line she had crossed without noticing. What do we do now? She asked quietly. Kwame didn't hesitate. We find him. Ajoa nodded slowly. Yes, but her voice lacked its usual certainty. Because this was no longer just about fixing a mistake. It was about facing it. And when we do, she asked. Kwame looked at her. Long, carefully. We listen, he said. The simplicity of the answer unsettled her. Because listening was not something she had been doing. Not really. And if he doesn't come back, she asked. Kwame's expression hardened slightly. Then we go to him, he said. A pause. Then and we explain, he added, not as an institution. He held her gaze, but as people. The distinction mattered, more than anything else, because institutions could apologize without feeling, but people had to carry the weight. Adjoa nodded again, slower this time, because now she understood. Not everything, but enough. Enough to feel the beginning of something unfamiliar. Not fear, not anger, something deeper, something harder to sit with, regret. And outside, Kwaku was still walking, step by step, further away from the place where everything had been taken from him. Not knowing that, behind him, the truth was no longer hidden. And the people who had dismissed him were about to come looking. The sun had softened by the time Kwaku reached the edge of the main road. Traffic moved slowly, the late afternoon heat pressing down on the city like a heavy hand. Vendors called out their final sales drivers, argued over fares, and life continued with its usual stubborn rhythm. But for Kwaku, everything felt distant, muted. He walked without direction. At first, the envelope still clutched in his hand. The torn pieces inside shifted slightly with each step brushing against one another like something restless, something unfinished. He stopped near a small roadside stall and leaned against a wooden pole. For a moment he closed his eyes, and the memory came back. Not gently, not gradually, all at once. It had been raining that day. Not heavily, but enough to make the road slick and unpredictable. Kwaku had been younger then, stronger, still building something for himself. He had just closed his small repair shop for the evening when he heard the sound. A crash, metal against metal, sharp, violent, followed by silence. That kind of silence that doesn't belong on a busy road. He ran, without thinking, because that was who he had always been. The car was half off the road, its front crushed smoke curling from beneath the hood. The driver's side door was bent inward, barely holding together. Inside, a man, bleeding, unconscious. Kwaku didn't hesitate. He forced the door open, ignoring the heat, the sharp edges, the smell of fuel in the air. "Hey," he called. "Can you hear me?" No response. The man's breathing was shallow, too shallow. Kwaku reached in, careful but urgent, and pulled him out. The man's body was heavy, unresponsive, dead weight, but still alive. Kwaku dragged him away from the car, laying him gently on the wet ground. "Stay with me," he muttered, as if the man could hear him, as if words alone could hold someone to life. He looked around. No one else had stopped yet. Cars passed, slowed, then moved on, waiting for someone else to take responsibility. Kwaku turned back. That's when he saw it. The briefcase, half open, lying on the passenger seat. For a moment he hesitated. Just a second. Then he reached in and pulled it out. It was heavier than expected, solid, important. He placed it beside him and flipped it open, and what he saw made his breath catch. Documents, stacks, stamped, official, and beneath them, financial instruments, bearer bonds, ownership papers, things he didn't fully understand, but understood enough to know that this was not ordinary, enough to know that whoever owned this owned power, wealth, a future. He looked at the man lying beside him, bleeding, unconscious, defenseless, then back at the case. Rain tapped softly against the metal of the car. The world seemed to narrow. Just him, the man, the choice. No one was watching, no one would know. He could take something, just one document, one paper, enough to change everything, enough to save himself, to save Abena. Even then, she had already been struggling, already showing signs of the illness that would later consume their lives. He could fix it, right here, right now. No one would stop him, no one would question him, because no one else had stopped. Kwaku stared at the contents. His fingers hovered, just above. Then he closed the case, firmly, decisively, and something inside him settled. Not relief, Not pride, just certainty. He picked up the case and placed it beside the man again. Exactly where it belonged. Then he stood and waved down the next passing vehicle. "Help!" he shouted. This time someone stopped, then another, and soon there were people. An ambulance was called. The man was taken away, alive. Kwaku watched it leave, the briefcase going with it. Untouched, unchanged. He went home that night with nothing, except the knowledge that he had done what felt right. At the time, it didn't feel like sacrifice. It felt like normal, like the only thing he could have done. Kwaku opened his eyes. The present rushed back in, the noise, the heat, the weight in his chest. He looked down at the envelope again, at the torn pieces inside, and for the first time, he felt something close to anger. Not loud, not explosive, but deep, quiet, because now he understood what that moment had become. Not just a memory, not just a choice, but something that had followed him. Something that had been recognized but never delivered. Something that had arrived too late. Or perhaps at the wrong time. He let out a slow breath, then pushed himself away from the pole. He needed to go home. To Abena. To the only place that still made sense. Back at the bank, the atmosphere had shifted completely. There was no laughter now, no quiet dismissal, only tension, movement, urgency. Find him. Kwame said, his voice calm but firm. Staff scattered, phones were picked up, security footage reviewed, descriptions repeated. A man in worn clothes, carrying an envelope, medium height, quiet. The details felt inadequate, because now they mattered. Adjoa stood near the edge of the hall, watching it all unfold. Her arms were no longer crossed, her posture no longer rigid. She looked smaller, not physically, but in presence, because, for the first time, she was not in control. Madam, one of the staff, approached her hesitantly. "Should we inform the regional office?" Adjoa didn't answer immediately. Her eyes were fixed on the floor, on the spot where the check had fallen, where she had torn it, where everything had shifted. "Yes," she said finally. "Inform them." Her voice was steady, but something inside it had changed. The certainty. It was gone. In the hospital across the city, Abena lay still. Machines beeped softly around her. A nurse adjusted her drip, her movements practiced efficient. "She needs intervention soon," another nurse said quietly. "We can't delay much longer." "Does she have family?" the first asked. "A brother," the second replied. "He comes every day. Can he afford it?" A pause. "Then I don't think so." The first nurse sighed softly. Another story, another case, another life balanced between hope and limitation. Kwaku walked faster now. The streets blurred slightly as he moved. Because no matter what had happened, no matter what had been lost, one thing had not changed. Abena still needed him, and that was all that mattered. But somewhere behind him, the past he thought was finished had just begun to catch up, and this time, it wasn't going to stop. By the time Kwaku reached the hospital, the sky had begun to dim into a dull orange-gray. Evening in Accra always came with a strange quiet, not silence but a softening. The noise didn't disappear. It just settled, as if the city itself was tired. Kwaku moved quickly through the entrance, his steps echoing faintly against the tiled floor. The smell of antiseptic hit him immediately, familiar and unwelcome. He had walked these halls too many times. "Good evening," the nurse at the desk said, barely looking up. "Who are you here for, Abena Mensah?" he replied. The nurse glanced at a file, then back at him. "She's in Ward C. But the doctor has been asking for you." Kwaku's chest tightened. "Why? She'll explain," the nurse said gently, that tone again. Soft, measured, careful, the kind that prepared you for something you didn't want to hear. Kwaku nodded and walked toward the ward. Each step felt heavier now, slower, like his body already knew what was coming. Abena lay exactly where he had left her earlier that morning. Still, too still. The machine beside her beeped steadily, but the rhythm had changed slower, more fragile. Kwaku approached quietly. "Abena," he said softly. Her eyes opened after a moment. She smiled faintly when she saw him. "You came back early," she whispered. He forced a smile. "I told you I would." She studied his face. "You didn't go to the workshop," she said. It wasn't a question. Kwaku hesitated, then shook his head slightly. "No. What happened?" He looked away. For a second he considered telling her everything. The envelope, the check, the bank, the tearing. But the words felt too heavy, too complicated, and most of all, too cruel. "Nothing," he said finally. "Just something came up." Abena watched him. She knew him too well, but she didn't push. Not this time. "Okay," she said softly. Kwaku sat beside her. He reached for her hand, holding it gently. It felt colder than usual. That scared him more than anything. A knock came at the door. Kwaku turned. The doctor stepped in. Dr. Nana Asare, a woman in her 40s, calm professional with eyes that carried both intelligence and quiet empathy. "Kwaku," she said, "can I speak with you?" He nodded. He stood slowly and followed her out into the corridor. The door closed behind them. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, "She's getting weaker," Dr. Nana said. "No soft introduction. No unnecessary delay. Just truth." Kwaku nodded. "I know. We've done everything we can at this level," she continued. "But she needs surgery. Soon." "How soon?" he asked. Dr. Nana hesitated. "A few days," she said. "At most." Kwaku felt his chest tighten again. "And the cost?" he asked, though he already knew. She looked at him, carefully. "You've seen the estimate," she said. He nodded. "Yes." "It hasn't changed," she added gently. Of course it hadn't. Numbers like that didn't change for people like him. They stayed fixed, unreachable. "Unforgiving," Kwaku swallowed. "I'm trying," he said quietly. "I know," she replied. There was no judgment in her voice, only understanding, and that almost made it worse. "Is there any way to delay?" he asked. Dr. Nana shook her head. "Delaying increases the risk," she said, significantly. Kwaku closed his eyes for a second. Just 1 second, because he needed that moment to hold himself together. When he opened them again, his voice was steady. "I'll find a way," he said. Dr. Nana nodded. "I hope you do," she said. Then she placed a hand briefly on his arm. "If anything changes, let me know immediately." He nodded again. "Thank you." She gave him a small, sad smile, then walked away. Kwaku stood alone in the corridor. The fluorescent lights above buzzed softly. People passed. Nurses, patients, families, everyone carrying their own version of fear. He leaned back against the wall, and for the first time that day, he allowed himself to feel it fully. The weight, the pressure, the quiet panic rising in his chest. He reached into his bag and pulled out the envelope, opened it, looked at the torn pieces again. His fingers tightened around them for a moment. Just a moment. He imagined what would have happened if things had gone differently, if the check had been accepted, verified, processed, if he had walked out of that bank with hope instead of emptiness. Abena would already be scheduled for surgery. The doctors would be preparing. The fear would still be there, but it would be different, lighter, manageable. Instead, he was here, standing in a hallway, holding pieces of something that might have saved her. Something that had been destroyed in seconds, because of a decision, because of a judgment, because of a moment where he had not been seen. Kwaku let out a slow breath, then folded the pieces carefully, placed them back into the envelope, closed it, not because it still held value, but because it still held meaning. Back at the bank, the search had intensified. Security footage had been pulled, cameras replayed. "Pause it there," one staff member said. The screen froze. Kwaku stood at the entrance, envelope in hand, quiet, unremarkable, and yet now the most important person they needed to find. "That's him," someone confirmed. Which direction did he go? Checking outside cameras. Phones rang, calls were made, check nearby streets, ask the security vendors. "Get the traffic cameras." Kwame stood at the center of it all, calm, focused, but his eyes were sharp, because this was no longer just about correcting a mistake. This was about restoring something that had been broken twice, once years ago, and once today. "Find him," he said again. And this time there was urgency beneath the calm. Ajoa stood off to the side, watching, listening, processing. Her mind replayed the moment over and over again. The check, her words, the tearing, the silence that followed. And now this chaos, this reversal, this reality she had not seen. She closed her eyes briefly, just for a second, because something inside her, something she had built over years, was beginning to crack. Not completely, not yet, but enough to let something through. Doubt. Back in the ward, Kwaku returned to Abena's bedside. She was asleep again, her breathing shallow, fragile. He sat down quietly, took her hand, held it. "I'm here," he whispered, even though she couldn't hear him, or maybe she could. He didn't know anymore. Time felt different now, slower, heavier, more urgent. And somewhere, not far away, people were searching for him, running, calling, trying to undo what had been done. But Kwaku didn't know that. All he knew was that time was running out, and hope was slipping through his fingers. Piece by piece, night settled over Accra like a slow, quiet curtain. The city didn't sleep, but it changed. The noise softened into distant engines, scattered voices, and the hum of generators fighting against the dark. Streetlights flickered to life, casting long shadows across uneven roads. Inside the hospital, time felt different, measured, fragile. Each second marked not by clocks, but by the steady beeping of machines. Kwaku sat beside Abena, his back slightly bent, his hand still wrapped around hers. He hadn't moved much in the last hour, not because he couldn't, but because moving felt unnecessary. Everything that mattered was right there. Her breathing had grown quieter. Too quiet. "Kwaku," she whispered suddenly. He straightened immediately. "I'm here," he said. Her eyes opened slowly. She looked at him for a long moment, as if memorizing his face. "You didn't tell me the truth earlier," she said softly. Kwaku hesitated. "I didn't want to worry you." Abena smiled faintly. "You've never been good at hiding things," she murmured. He tried to smile back, but it didn't hold. There was something, he admitted. What kind of something? Kwaku looked down at their hands, then back at her. "A chance," he said quietly. Abena's eyes sharpened slightly. "A chance," she repeated. He nodded. "For money," he said. "For your treatment." Her breath caught just a little. "And she asked." Kwaku swallowed. It didn't work out. Silence, not heavy, not sharp, just quiet. Abena studied him. "You're not telling me everything she said." Kwaku looked away. "Because she was right, but how do you explain something that sounds impossible and ended in something even worse?" "It doesn't matter," he said finally. Abena squeezed his hand weakly. "It matters if it hurt you," she said. That was when he looked back at her, and, for a moment, he almost told her everything. The envelope, the check, the humiliation, the tearing. But instead, he just shook his head. "I'm fine," he said. Abena didn't argue. Not because she believed him, but because she understood him. And sometimes understanding meant letting silence do its work. Across the city inside a small apartment, lit by a single bulb, Efua Owusu sat at her table, staring at her phone. Her hands trembled slightly. Not from fear alone, but from the weight of a decision. The bank's internal group chat had been buzzing for hours. Messages, calls, questions. Who handled the client? Was the check verified? Where is the man now? And then, a name. Kwaku Mensah. Efua closed her eyes, because she had been there, not at the center, not speaking, but watching. She had seen everything, from the moment Kwaku walked in, to the moment the check tore. She had said nothing, like everyone else, because that was how things worked. You didn't challenge authority. You didn't interfere. You stayed in your place. But now, everything had changed, because the man they dismissed was not who they thought he was, and the silence she had chosen was no longer safe. Efua stood up suddenly, pacing the small room. Her mind replayed the moment again. Kwaku's voice. Calm, respectful. Please just verify it. The way he didn't raise his voice, didn't argue, didn't fight back, and that made it worse, because it meant he had trusted them, at least a little, and they had failed him. She stopped pacing, looked at her phone again. There was one message that stood out. From the regional office, anyone with direct knowledge of the incident must report immediately. Efua's chest tightened. Direct knowledge. That was her, but reporting meant stepping forward. And stepping forward meant risk. Because Adjoa was not just her manager. She was powerful, respected, feared, and people who challenged her didn't last long. Efua knew that. Everyone did. She sat down slowly. Her fingers hovered over the phone, then pulled back. Because fear is not loud. It doesn't shout. It whispers. Stay quiet. Protect yourself. This is not your problem. But another voice, quieter but stronger, pushed back. If not you, then who? Efua closed her eyes again. And this time, she saw Kwaku, standing alone, holding that envelope, being judged before he even spoke. She exhaled slowly, then picked up the phone. Her fingers moved, typing, deleting, typing again. Then she pressed send. Back at the bank, Kwame stood near the large window overlooking the city. The search had spread beyond the immediate area. Security teams, contacts, even local authorities had been quietly alerted. But still, no sign. He could be anywhere by now, one staff member said nervously. Kwame didn't respond, because he knew something they didn't. People like Kwaku didn't disappear randomly. They returned to what mattered, and right now, there was only one place that mattered. Adjoa stood behind her desk, staring at the same spot she had been looking at for hours. Her reflection in the glass was still there, still composed, still controlled, but something beneath it was shifting. Her phone buzzed. She picked it up. A message from the regional office. New testimony incoming. Staff member Efua Owusu. Adjoa's grip tightened slightly. Efua. She remembered her. Quiet, efficient, invisible, or so she had thought. Another message followed. Security footage being reviewed. Full report, pending. Adjoa placed the phone down slowly, because now it was no longer just about what happened. It was about what would be revealed. And that was far more dangerous. At the hospital, Kwaku hadn't moved. Abena was asleep again. The machines continued their steady rhythm, and time continued to slip. A nurse approached quietly. "Sir," she said gently. Kwaku looked up. "Yes, we may need to move her soon," she said. "The doctor wants to prepare." "For surgery?" he asked. The nurse hesitated. "Preparation," she repeated carefully. Kwaku nodded. He understood. Preparation didn't mean certainty. It meant urgency. It meant the window was closing. "Okay," he said. The nurse gave him a small, sympathetic look, then walked away. Kwaku looked back at Abena. His hand tightened around hers. I'm not done, he whispered. I haven't failed you yet. But even as he said it, there was a part of him that wasn't sure anymore. Because sometimes doing your best isn't enough, and that is the hardest truth to carry. Across the city, Efua stepped out into the night. Her heart was racing, but her steps were steady, because once a decision is made, there is no going back, and somewhere unseen, the truth was beginning to move, piece by piece, toward the place where it had been ignored, toward the people who needed to hear it, and toward the man who had been silent for too long. The message Efua sent did not explode immediately. It didn't create noise. It didn't shake the building. Instead, it moved quietly, like truth often does, slow, precise, unavoidable. Inside the bank's internal system, her report appeared first as a flagged submission, direct witness account incident involving Kwaku Mensah. A compliance officer opened it, read, paused, then forwarded it, up, higher. Within minutes it reached Kwame Ofori. He read it once, then again, each line adding weight to what he already knew but now confirmed by someone who had stood inside the moment. Efua described everything, not dramatically, not emotionally, just clearly. The arrival, the questions, the tone, the doubt, the refusal to verify, the tearing of the check, the silence that followed, and one detail small, but impossible to ignore. He never raised his voice. He only asked for verification. Kwame exhaled slowly as he finished reading, because that line said everything. "Call her," he said, immediately. Back at the hospital, Kwaku stood as nurses began preparing Abena for transfer. Careful, one said as they adjusted the bed. Slowly, the machines were unplugged and reconnected with practiced efficiency. Tubes checked, monitors repositioned. Everything moved with purpose. But beneath it there was tension, because everyone in that room knew what this meant. This wasn't routine. This was a line, one side waiting, the other risk. Kwaku stepped aside, watching. His hands hung at his sides empty, because there was nothing left to hold on to, except her, and hope. But hope was fading. His phone vibrated suddenly. He frowned. He almost ignored it. Almost, but something made him reach into his pocket. The screen lit up. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Hello. Kwaku Mensah," a voice said. Calm, professional. "Yes, this is the office of Mr. Kwame Ofori. We need to speak with you immediately." Kwaku's grip tightened on the phone. For a second, he didn't speak, because the name meant nothing to him. But the tone. It was different. Not dismissive, not questioning. Certain. "I've already been to the bank," he said quietly. "We know," the voice replied. A pause. "Then we need you to come back." Kwaku closed his eyes briefly. "No," he said. The word came out softer than expected, but firm. "I understand your hesitation." The voice continued, "But I said no." Kwaku repeated, because he couldn't do it again, couldn't walk back into that place, couldn't stand there, be looked at like that, again. "My sister is in the hospital," he added. "I don't have time for this." There was silence on the other end. Then, "Where are you?" the voice asked. Kwaku frowned. "That's not important." "It is," the voice said, gently. "Because we are coming to you." That made him pause. Why, he asked. Another brief silence. Then because what happened today should not have happened. Kwaku didn't respond. "Please," the voice added. "Just tell us where you are." Kwaku looked at Abena, at the nurses moving around her, at the machines, at everything he might lose. Then he spoke. "City General Hospital," he said. "Ward C." "We're on our way," the voice replied. The line went dead. Kwaku lowered the phone slowly. He didn't know what to feel. Not hope. Not yet. Because hope had already been taken from him once today. Back at the bank, Kwame moved quickly. "Get the car," he said. "No delay. No discussion." Adjoa stood nearby, watching, listening. "Sir," she said carefully. "May I come?" Kwame looked at her for a long moment, not angry, not cold, just assessing. Then yes, he said. One word, but it carried weight. Because this was not an invitation. It was accountability. The drive through the city was quiet. Too quiet. Kwame sat in the back seat, reviewing the report again. Adjoa sat beside him, still, composed on the outside. But inside, everything was shifting, because now she was no longer defending a decision. She was walking toward its consequences. "Sir," she said finally. Kwame didn't look up. "Yes, I didn't know," she said. He nodded slightly. "I believe that, but I should have verified," she added. Yes. The answer was simple, uncomplicated, because some truths didn't need explanation. Adjoa looked out the window, at the passing lights, at the city moving on as if nothing had changed. But for her, everything had. At the hospital, Kwaku stood as Abena was wheeled out. "I'm coming with her," he said. "Of course," a nurse replied. He walked beside the bed, his hand resting lightly on the edge, not letting go, not even for a second, because he didn't know how many moments like this were left. The car pulled into the hospital shortly after. Kwame stepped out first, then Adjoa. They moved quickly inside. "Ward C," Kwame asked. "Second floor," the receptionist replied. They didn't wait, didn't slow, because now time mattered. They reached the corridor, just as Kwaku appeared at the far end, walking beside the moving bed, his hand still there, still holding on. Kwame stopped, for a moment, because seeing him again in that setting made everything clearer. This was not a man chasing money. This was a man chasing time and losing. "Kwaku," Kwame called. Kwaku turned. His eyes met Kwame's. Recognition didn't come immediately, but something else did. Caution, distance. He stopped walking. The nurses continued ahead, unaware. "Kwaku Mensah," Kwame said again, stepping closer. "I'm Kwame Ofori." Kwaku said nothing. He just watched, waiting, not trusting, not yet. Kwame took a breath. "Then I owe you an apology," he said. The words landed softly, but deeply, because they were not corporate, not formal, human. Adjoa stood behind him, silent, because this was not her moment to speak. Not yet. Kwaku's eyes shifted between them, then back to Kwame. For what, he asked. Kwame didn't hesitate. "For what was done to you today," he said, "and for what should have been done years ago." Silence, heavy, real, and for the first time since everything began. The truth was no longer hidden. It was standing there, in front of him, waiting. The corridor seemed to narrow around them. Not physically, but in that way. Space tightens when something important is about to be said. Kwaku stood still, his eyes fixed on Kwame Ofori. Behind him, the nurses continued moving Abena's bed down the hallway, unaware that everything around them had shifted. For what? Kwaku had asked. And now, he waited, not impatiently, not angrily, just carefully. Because he had learned something over the years, words can sound sincere. Without meaning anything, Kwame stepped closer. Not too close, just enough. For what happened inside that bank, he said again. "You were not treated with dignity. That is our failure." Kwaku's gaze didn't soften. Because apology was not the same as repair. "I asked for verification," Kwaku said quietly. "I know," Kwame replied. "They refused." "I know." Kwaku's jaw tightened slightly. "They tore it," he added. Kwame nodded. Yes, there was no denial, no excuse, just acknowledgement. And somehow that made it harder, because it meant the truth was not being avoided. Kwaku looked past him, at Adjoa, standing there, silent, still. Their eyes met, for the first time since the bank, and everything that had been unspoken before was suddenly visible. She didn't look away, but she didn't hold the gaze with authority anymore. Something had changed. I didn't know who you were, she said. Her voice was steady, but softer. Different. Kwaku studied her, then shook his head slightly. That wasn't the problem, he said. The words hit harder than anything else, because they were true, and everyone knew it. The problem had never been identity. It had been assumption, judgment, dismissal. Kwame glanced briefly at Ajoa, then back at Kwaku. The check was real, he said. And it still is. Kwaku let out a short, quiet breath. It's in pieces, he replied. It can be reissued, Kwame said immediately. That made Kwaku pause. Because for the first time, something shifted. Not hope, but possibility. You can do that, he asked. Yes, without hesitation, without doubt. Kwaku looked down briefly, then back up. And how long will that take? He asked. Kwame didn't answer immediately. Because now they were no longer talking about documents. They were talking about time. And time was something Kwaku didn't have. My sister needs surgery, Kwaku said. Soon, Kwame nodded. I understand. No, Kwaku said quietly. You don't. There was no anger in his voice, just truth. You can fix papers, he continued. You can call offices, you can move things. A pause. But she doesn't have time for process. Silence settled again. Because he was right, and everyone knew it. Kwame exhaled slowly, then stepped closer. This is no longer about process, he said. Kwaku's eyes narrowed slightly. Then what is it about Kwame met his gaze? It's about doing what should have been done. The moment you walked into that building, he said. Kwaku said nothing, because words were no longer enough. Behind them, a nurse called out, Sir, we need to move her now. Kwaku turned immediately. Abena's bed had stopped further down the corridor. The medical team was adjusting something urgently. What's happening? He asked, moving quickly toward them. Her vitals are unstable, the nurse said. We need to prepare immediately. Kwaku's heart dropped. How bad, he asked. The nurse didn't answer directly. Please step aside, she said. Kwaku hesitated, then stepped back, but only a little. Not far enough to feel removed, because he needed to see her, needed to be there. Kwame watched the scene unfold, and in that moment, everything became clear. This wasn't about correcting a mistake. This wasn't about reputation. This wasn't about the bank. This was about a life, and time was running out. He turned. Call Dr. Nana Asare, he said to one of the staff who had followed. Now. The staff member moved immediately. Ajoa stood frozen for a second, watching, processing, because this was the real consequence. Not reports, not investigations, not her position. This, a woman on a hospital bed, a brother with nothing left, and a decision she had made without thinking twice. She stepped forward slowly, stopping a few feet from Kwaku. I'm sorry, she said. The words felt small, insufficient, but they were real. Kwaku didn't look at her. Not yet. Because his eyes were fixed on Abena. I know that doesn't change anything, she added quietly. Still, no response. Because sometimes silence is not rejection. It's simply the absence of space for anything else. A doctor rushed in. Dr. Nana Asare, what's happening? She asked quickly. Blood pressure dropping, a nurse replied. We're preparing for emergency intervention. Dr. Nana nodded, then turned and saw Kwame. Her expression shifted. Mr. Ofori Kwame stepped forward. Doctor, he said. What do you need? Dr. Nana hesitated, just for a second, because this question. It wasn't usual. We need to stabilize her, she said, and proceed with surgery. And the limitation? Kwame asked. She understood immediately. The cost, she said. Kwame nodded. Consider it handled. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Immediate. Unconditional. Dr. Nana looked at him carefully. Are you certain, she asked. Yes. No hesitation. No delay. She nodded once, then turned back to her team. Prepare for surgery, she said, immediately. The energy in the room shifted, from hesitation to action. Kwaku stood still. Processing. What did you just say? He asked quietly. Kwame turned to him. Your sister will receive the treatment she needs, he said. Kwaku stared at him. Not trusting, not fully understanding why he asked. Kwame didn't look away. Because it should have happened already, he said. A pause. And because you earned it. Long before today. The words landed, deep. But Kwaku didn't respond immediately. Because this was not something he could accept easily. Not after what had just happened. Not after everything. Money doesn't come like this, he said slowly. Kwame nodded. You're right. Then why now? Kwame held his gaze. Because we failed you before, he said, and we will not fail you again. Silence. Long. Heavy. Real. Kwaku looked back at Abena. At the doctors moving around her. At the urgency, the fear, the reality. Then back at Kwame. And for the first time, something shifted. Not full trust. Not yet. But enough. Enough to let something in. Save her, he said. That was it. No speech, no gratitude. Just truth, just need. Kwame nodded. We will. The doors to the operating room opened. Abena was wheeled inside. The doors closed behind her. And, just like that, everything stopped. Not outside, but inside Kwaku, because now there was nothing left to do, except wait, and hope, again. But this time, hope was no longer empty. It was fragile, uncertain, but real. And, standing beside him, were the people who had taken it away. Now trying to give it back. The red light above the operating room door turned on. Steady, unforgiving. Time inside that room no longer followed the rhythm of the outside world. It stretched folded, slowed down until every second felt heavier than the last. Kwaku stood a few steps away from the door, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. He hadn't sat down, hadn't moved, not even when the nurse gently suggested he rest. I'm fine, he had said. But he wasn't. He was holding himself together, piece by piece, the same way he had picked up the torn fragments of that check. Only now, the stakes were not paper. They were life. Kwame stood nearby, speaking quietly into his phone. Yes, he said. Initiate full internal review. I want every record related to Daniel Owusu's directive pulled. A pause. And the branch incident, no delays. Immediate disciplinary review. He ended the call and looked toward Kwaku. The man hadn't changed position. Not once. There was something about that stillness that struck him. Not weakness, not resignation. Something stronger. Endurance. Kwame stepped closer. You should sit, he said. Kwaku shook his head. I'll stand. Kwame didn't argue. Because he understood. Sometimes standing is the only way to feel like you still have control. Ajoa sat on a bench across the corridor. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers interlocked so tightly they had begun to ache. But she didn't loosen them, because the physical pressure grounded her, kept her from drifting too far into what she was beginning to feel. She watched Kwaku, the way he stood, the way he didn't speak, the way he didn't demand anything, and that made it worse, because there was no anger to respond to, no argument to defend against, just presence and consequence. Her mind replayed the moment again, the tearing, the sound, the look on his face, and now, this. She swallowed hard, because for the first time in years she wasn't thinking about her position, her authority, her control. She was thinking about something she had avoided for a long time. Responsibility. Hours passed. Slowly, painfully. The hospital corridor changed as night deepened. Visitors thinned. Voices lowered. The air grew cooler. But inside, Kwaku, nothing changed. Every sound from behind the operating room door made his chest tighten. Every passing minute stretched his patience thinner. At some point, a nurse approached. "Sir," she said gently, "the surgery is ongoing. It may take several more hours." Kwaku nodded. "Thank you." His voice was calm, but his eyes, they were somewhere else, somewhere between hope and fear. Kwame checked his watch, then looked at Ajoa. "Come," he said. She stood immediately, followed him a few steps away from Kwaku. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Kwame studied her. "You know what happens," he said. She nodded slowly. "Yes, but knowing and accepting were not the same thing." "I misjudged him," she said. Kwame didn't respond immediately. "You didn't just misjudge him," he said finally. "You decided his value before giving him the chance to prove it." The words were direct, but not harsh, because harshness wasn't necessary anymore. The truth was enough. Ajoa looked down. "I thought I was protecting the system," she said. Kwame shook his head slightly. "The system doesn't need protection from people like him," he said. A pause. "It needs protection for people like him." That landed deep, because it challenged something fundamental, something she had built her identity on. "I forgot that," she admitted. Kwame nodded. "Yes." Another pause. Then, "What you do next," he continued, "matters more than what you did." Ajoa looked up. "For him," she asked. "For yourself," Kwame replied. Back in the operating room, the team worked with focused intensity. Dr. Nana Asare stood at the center, calm, precise, every movement deliberate. "Vitals," she asked. Stabilizing, a nurse replied. "Continue," Dr. Nana said. There was no room for doubt here, no room for hesitation, only action. Because outside, A-Man was waiting, holding on to something fragile, and inside, they were fighting to make it real. Kwaku's legs had begun to ache, but he didn't sit, didn't lean, didn't shift, because movement felt like distraction, and he couldn't afford distraction, not now, not when everything was happening behind that door. Kwame watched him, then spoke quietly. "She's strong." Kwaku didn't look at him. "I know," he said. Silence again. Then, "You didn't have to help," Kwaku added. Kwame frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "At the accident," Kwaku said. "You didn't have to come back for this." Kwame understood. "You're wrong," he said. Kwaku glanced at him. Kwame nodded. "Yes." A pause. "You gave something when you had nothing," he said. "Now we're returning what should have been given long ago." Kwaku looked away again, because he didn't know how to respond to that. Not yet. Time moved, slow, heavy. Then the red light above the door flickered, once, twice, then turned off. Everything stopped, not physically, but emotionally. Kwaku's breath caught. The door opened. Dr. Nana stepped out, her face calm, but tired. "Kwaku," she said. He moved immediately. "How is she?" he asked. Dr. Nana held his gaze. "Then she made it through the surgery," she said. The words landed, soft but powerful. Kwaku's shoulders dropped slightly, just slightly, as if something he had been holding finally loosened. "She's stable for now," Dr. Nana continued, "but recovery will take time." Kwaku nodded. Yes, he didn't smile, didn't celebrate, because this wasn't the end. But it was something real, something he hadn't had before. Relief. Kwame stepped forward. "Thank you, doctor," he said. Dr. Nana nodded. "She's not out of danger completely," she added. "But this gives her a chance. That word again, chance." But this time it wasn't abstract. It was real. Ajoa stood a few steps back, watching, listening. And for the first time, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Not fear, not pressure, something else. Humility, because now she could see the full weight of what had almost been lost. Not money, not reputation, a life, And that was something no system could replace. Kwaku stepped closer to the door, not entering, just standing there, as if being close was enough, as if distance, even a few steps, was too much. Kwame watched him, then turned slightly. "Begin the formal proceedings," he said quietly to one of his staff. "Full compensation. Immediate release." "Yes, sir. And the branch?" the staff member asked. Kwame's expression hardened slightly. "We will address it," he said. A pause. "But not before we finish what matters here." The corridor settled again. Not silent, but calmer, different, because something had changed. Something had been saved. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to begin again. And standing there, Kwaku finally allowed himself to sit. Just for a moment. Because now he could. Morning came quietly. Not with noise or urgency, but with a soft, steady light that filtered through the hospital windows and rested gently on the white walls. For the first time in days, the air felt different. Lighter. Not because everything was solved, but because something had shifted. Something important had been pulled back from the edge. Kwaku sat beside Abena's bed, his head slightly bowed, his hands resting loosely in his lap. He had finally slept. Not long, not deeply, but enough. Enough to steady himself. The machines beside Abena now beeped in a calmer rhythm. Her breathing, though still whack, was more stable. The tightness that had once filled the room had eased. A nurse stepped in quietly. "She's responding well," she said softly. Kwaku nodded. "Thank you." The nurse smiled gently. "You can talk to her," she added. "She may not fully wake yet, but she can hear you." Kwaku turned his gaze back to Abena. For a moment he said nothing. Then, "You scared me," he whispered. His voice was low, careful, as if even sound could disturb her. "I thought I was too late." He paused, swallowed. "But you stayed," he continued, "like you always do." His hand moved, resting lightly over hers. "And I'm still here." Later that morning, Kwame Ofori returned. Not with urgency this time, but with intention. He stood at the doorway for a moment before stepping in. Kwaku noticed him immediately. He stood, out of respect, not obligation. "How is she?" Kwame asked. "Better," Kwaku replied. "Still weak, but better." Kwame nodded. "That's good." There was a brief silence. Not uncomfortable, just real. Then Kwame stepped forward, placing a sealed envelope on the small table beside the bed. "This is for you," he said. Kwaku looked at it. Didn't reach for it immediately. "What is it?" he asked. "A reissued instrument," Kwame replied. "Verified, cleared, and already processed." Kwaku's eyes narrowed slightly. "You're serious?" "Yes." Kwaku hesitated, then slowly picked it up, opened it. Inside a new check. Perfect, untorn, undamaged, real. He stared at it for a long moment, not smiling, not reacting outwardly, just absorbing, because this was what had been taken from him. And now it was back, but it didn't feel the same. Because the journey to this moment had changed something, changed him. "Thank you," he said finally. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Kwame nodded. "You don't owe us gratitude," he said. "We owe you accountability." Kwaku didn't argue, because for the first time, that statement felt honest. Adjoa stood just outside the room, waiting. Not because she had to, but because she chose to. Her hands were no longer clenched, her posture no longer rigid, but she didn't move immediately. Because she understood something now. Presence matters. Timing matters. And this moment was not hers. After a few seconds, Kwame stepped out. He looked at her. "He's ready," he said quietly. Adjoa nodded, took a breath, then stepped inside. Kwaku looked up as she entered. Their eyes met again. This time there was no tension, no confrontation, just recognition. Adjoa stepped forward slowly, stopped a few feet away. "I won't repeat what I already said," she began. Her voice was calm, measured, "but I need you to hear this clearly." Kwaku said nothing. He listened. "I was wrong," she said. "No excuses, no conditions, just truth. I judged you without evidence," she continued, "and I acted on that judgment." Kwaku's expression didn't change, but his eyes stayed on her. "I built my career on discipline and control," she added. "But somewhere along the way, I lost perspective, a pause, and that cost you something you didn't deserve to lose." Silence. Adjoa exhaled slowly. "I can't undo what I did," she said, "but I will face the consequences of it." Kwaku studied her. Then he nodded. Once. Not forgiveness, not rejection, just acknowledgement. And sometimes, that's where healing begins. Days passed, slowly, carefully. Abena regained strength little by little. Her eyes opened more often, her voice grew stronger. The color returned to her face. And with each small improvement, Kwaku felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. Not complete, not overwhelming, but steady. The bank moved quickly. Investigations concluded, policies reviewed, changes implemented. Not just on paper, but in practice, because this time they understood what was at stake. Adjoa stepped down from her position. Not forced, but chosen. Because accountability, she realized, was not just about consequence, it was about responsibility. And responsibility meant accepting when you had failed, even when it cost you everything you had built. Weeks later, Kwaku stood outside a small building. Fresh paint, clean windows, a simple sign above the door, Mensa Community Support Center. He looked at it quietly, then stepped inside. Inside, a few chairs were arranged neatly. A desk, a small office space. Nothing extravagant, nothing excessive, but enough. Enough to begin something new. A place where people like him would not be dismissed, would not be judged, would be heard, because he knew what it felt like to stand on the other side. Abena sat near the window watching him. "You didn't have to do this," she said. Kwaku smiled slightly. "Yes, I did." She tilted her head. Why, he looked around the room, then back at her. "Because no one should have to beg to be taken seriously," he said. Abena nodded slowly. "You've changed," she said. Kwaku shook his head. "No," he replied. "I just remembered who I was. Somewhere in the city, life continued. Busy, unpredictable, unfair at times, but also capable of change, capable of growth, capable of justice. And sometimes all it takes is one moment, one decision. One person choosing to do the right thing, even when no one is watching. In life, people are often judged long before they are understood. A person's clothes appearance or situation can become a false measure of their worth. But this story reminds us that true value does not come from what we show. It comes from who we are when no one is watching. Kwaku had nothing, yet he chose honesty, and even when the world ignored him, delayed him, and humiliated him, that integrity did not disappear. It waited, and when the moment came, it changed everything. Sometimes justice is delayed, but it is not always denied. And sometimes the greatest wealth is not money, but the strength to remain human in a world that tries to strip that away. If this story touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Right now, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss stories that remind us what truly matters.